Hey everybody, welcome to the webinar today. We're just going to let people roll in here for a little bit and we'll get started in 1 minute. Okay. All right, we'll go ahead and get started. Hi everyone, my name is Andrea Burton. Welcome to How Zendesk Planted the Garden Design System. I'm a design advocate at Abstract, and we are so lucky today to have Allison Shaw from Zendesk. She's going to be talking to us today about the garden design system. So, like I said, I'm Andrea Burton. I'm a design advocate at Abstract. I've been at Abstract for a little bit over a year. I've been a designer for a really long time. I previously worked at Target in design ops. So I'm passionate about design workflow and design systems. So I'm really excited to talk to Allison today. And I will introduce Allison. Allison Shaw, she is the Senior Design Manager over the design systems at Zendesk. Allison has been working on design systems since 2013. At Zendesk, her team is working to make the garden design system a best-in-class product that powers their application suite and serves as an open source accessible foundation for outside organizations. Great. Allison, do you want to say hello?
Hey everybody. Thank you for that intro. That's totally accurate, and I don't have anything else to add right now.
Right on. Cool. Right on. Well, let's jump into garden. Before we jump into garden, I like to really get everybody's story. So tell us how you got into the design system world.
Yeah, definitely. So, excuse me, back in 2013, I was working at Yelp, and I was in the middle of redesigning the business page on the web property, which I think everybody kind of knows. Whenever you go to Yelp, you go to a business page. That was the page that we were working on. And as part of that redesign, we were introducing a whole new visual language. But the Yelp design team at the time was just me and one other person. And so we really weren't able to, kind of scale up ourselves in order to help everybody get this, really vibrant new visual language into the work that they were doing. And so I was looking for ways to kind of help the organization get to this new place faster, and sat down with one of my front-end engineers, Molly, and we just kind of went for it over a like week-long kind of hack period, and came out with one of the first, I think, really modern design systems where not only were there design assets, but there were also code assets that any front-end developer at the company could just place into the work that they were doing. So it was kind of the beginning of it for me.
That's so cool. And so what's your story of going from Yelp to Zendesk and starting to work on design system?
Yeah, so after Yelp, I worked at a couple of other companies in San Francisco. I worked at Twitter for a year on their growth team, and I worked at a company called Thumbtack on their consumer-facing application. And at the time that I was getting ready to move on from Thumbtack, I was thinking about, when did I have the most fun in my career, and where did I think I would be able to add the most value in an organization. I kind of, came back to that time when I was working on Yelp's, we called it a style guide. When we were at Yelp, we didn't even have the language of design system yet. And so I started to look for jobs that were really focused on design systems, and Zendesk had one. I actually knew a couple of folks who worked there and really loved the culture and loved the people that they were working with. And so I went in for the interview, and the rest is history. I've been focused on design systems for the entire 3 years that I've been at Zendesk, sorry.
Right on. That's awesome. So, what is the story of the garden design system from when you joined? Was it existing beforehand? And what has happened since you joined?
Yeah.
Any anecdotes? Did they start with the design or the code base?
Yeah. So when I came to Zendesk, I was hired by, and I was working with a gentleman named Jonathan Zempel, and he's the originator of Garden at Zendesk. He's an engineer who, through an acquisition, actually ended up on the creative team at Zendesk. And so the genesis of Garden is that as he was looking around for places that he could make a real impact at the company when he joined, he was seeing that, you know, there was a lot of inconsistencies on the product itself in production, but also even in the assets that the designers were creating. And so he felt that he would be able to make an impact and really help the team through the creation of a code base and some assets that were uniform and that could be reused all over the product suite. So that's really the genesis of it. Over time, so that was actually, he started that in 2015. I got there kind of mid 2017. So he'd been working on it for about 3 years at that point. And over that time, he had worked with designers on the team who, were interested in doing this work, but they weren't fully resourced to it. And I was the first full-time hire. So I think, the important thing, especially about Garden, is that I think, as with any good design system, right, it's not really a true design system unless there's that code aspect of it, right? It's one thing to be able to create a library for designers, but it's quite another for an entire product organization to be able to use the same language and the same assets as everybody else. So, yeah.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, I've definitely seen that in my past at Target, and then working with teams, like really getting that adoption and that governance. Cool. Well, let's jump into Garden. So just for everybody on the call with us, basically the agenda is Allison's going to walk us through the Garden project, some of the sketch files, and then we're going to save 15 minutes at the end for questions. So anyone who's throwing in Q&A, if you can upvote the questions you want to know, at the end we'll start jumping into questions. So, okay. We've got the abstract, your org up. Talk to us about how Garden is set up within abstract. What projects do you have? And how do you guys kind of work within those projects?
Yeah, absolutely. So you can see that we make good use of abstract organization features like sections and also starred projects and starred sections. The, of course, kind of primary project that we have for Garden is the Garden Libraries project that you can see in the upper left-hand corner. The other projects that we have in our section are for, there's a couple of different ones that I'll talk about. So all the way over on the right, you can see the Garden Libraries Contrib project, and that is where people from the design organization at Zendesk, if they're interested in contributing something to Garden, we created that project as a dedicated space for them to be able to work inside of. The next important one to mention are the Garden patterns, which are in that middle row on the left-hand side. And, if you think about a design system in the atomic way, so atomic and atoms being kind of your individual components, for us, those live in the Garden libraries, and then the Garden patterns are your more complex organisms, so your molecules and your actual like organisms. And that's where, you know, things like page layouts or things that are meant to encompass like a full interaction pattern. So a great example of that is like we have a severe destructive modal pattern. So if someone needs to delete something and the consequence of that action is very, very high, then we put our user through a modal flow that has them kind of spell out and recognize that what they're doing could have some severe effects. And so we have each step of that flow in a file in there. Some of the other stuff in here, we have the Garden website, so garden.zendesk.com. All of our assets and work that we're doing on that site live in those two projects, the Garden website as well as the site documentation assets. And then we have mobile libraries, which are actually maintained by our mobile team, but it's part of kind of the Garden moniker. And then we also have a product illustrations library.
Cool. For the garden patterns, do you have that entire flow as one big symbol that people bring in, or are they separate symbols? Just curious how people set that up.
So they're separate symbols.
Yeah.
The modal itself is the symbol, and so a designer can place that on top of whatever kind of like originating screen they have.
Cool.
Yeah.
Right on. Let's go to the next screen. Let's talk about how your team works within a project. So we've jumped into the Garden Libraries project. Talk to me about, you know, this project and how your team works within here.
Yeah, definitely. So one of the first things that I always like to point people to when I'm introducing them to Garden is our little about section that we have over on the right. This is an area for us to communicate to the rest of the design organization, you know, what is this project about? Are there any relevant links that people might want to reference if they're trying to use it? So we have links to our documentation and our JIRA. We also have this README that talks about how our master files reflect what is live on production / available to developers. And that goes again to kind of that definition of a true design system. And the reason why we ensure that our sketch libraries match our developer code bases is so that if a designer uses something, they can actually know without a shadow of a doubt that it will be available to them as they start to go into the building phases. Couple of other things to call out. You can sort of see them in this screenshot. There's another one later, but we have a little emoji key that we use. Yeah, there we go. On every branch that we have. So it makes it a little bit easier for us to search for things. You know, these are kind of custom to us, but they serve as, I think, like a good little reference point and just like quick check of like, okay, what exactly am I doing? What's the scope of what I'm doing?
Yeah. And so you guys are using emojis and branch names, right?
Yes.
Yeah, cool. I love the bug emoji.
Yeah.
And like to go to the next screen, I want to talk about the naming a little bit. So just to reiterate, the names here are the same exact names that are in your React code, correct?
Exactly, yeah. So you can see that we've kind of split out our files. We have quite a number of library files. And the reason for that is exactly as you're saying, Andrea. We go through and ensure that what we're calling the design assets mirrors precisely what the developers would see in code. And again, that's to reinforce that shared language for the product development team.
Cool. Yeah, I found that to be really powerful, especially once designers and devs do start to speak the same language, then they can kind of get that blocker out of the way. And it's like, oh, why aren't you using our modals? You know, and it's like, oh, you're right. I should be using that.
Exactly.
And so I see you've got colors and typography and inputs here, because I wanted some people to be able to see what your files look like. Let's jump into some of these foundational elements and talk about how you have those files set up.
Yeah, so we make heavy use of Sketch's override capabilities. So the screen that we're looking at right now is in the colors file. Each of these little swatches is actually a layer style. So they represent statefulness, they represent different color options that are available, and they are fully integrated into the rest of our symbols as layer styles. And so the reason for this is that in the inevitable event of a redesign, it's going to be a lot easier for us to make global changes to the rest of our library. And as you saw earlier, we have about 20 different library files. And so if we had to go into all of them and individually, on every single item, update everything, it's just a recipe for human error. And this allows us to simplify and to kind of see everything in one place and make sure that everything is looking and feeling uniform.
And are you guys, is Zendesk using color names? Like when designers are talking to developers, are they using the color names? Are you guys using design tokens? Where are you at in that process?
So we, the Garden design system on the code side utilizes theming to make sure that everything is staying uniform. So we do have some theming names available, but the designer communication does tend to fall around the colors themselves. And our color system is really thoughtful, if I do say so myself. But we have 8 colors, 8 shades per color. So 100 through 800. And we did that so that it kind of mirrors the same way that CSS manages font weights. So the darker the color, the higher the number. And that color system has a lot of accessibility features built into it. So anything over 600 is guaranteed to meet a AA rating. Anything in the 800 range will meet a AAA rating. And if you put a 600 on top of a 100, that's also guaranteed to meet the accessibility constraints for AA.
I love that. That is super thoughtful, especially around the accessibility stuff, like just being able to know the rules and know when you're designing with certain colors. So
yeah,
big thumbs up on that. Let's jump into typography.
Yeah. So similarly here, we have a lot of different kind of base type styles, which you see up in the top. Those are representing our main color usage. So generally in typography, we're using kind of default grays for most text, blue obviously for links and interactive elements, and then we have some validation colors. We've created kind of custom and specific type styles to support particular kinds of elements. And it's a little bit tough to see on here, but you can see like we have some monospace treatments. We have special, yeah, down there. And then like for tags and badges or pagination, even some of the date stuff, those are using centered typography, which is not our typical, not our default. And so we've created specific type styles that support each of those different components. And again, this is to help us in the event that we ever need to make an update. We can just go through and update these rather than having to go in individually and change everything on its own.
Cool. That's great. That looks awesome. Danger bold. I love that name. Cool. And then let's jump into the inputs and how you have these symbols set up.
Yeah, so I wanted to show this to kind of demonstrate how we bring in those color and those type styles into an actual component. So you can see in this screenshot, I've clicked on a field label, and you can see over in the panel that the type has taken on that default bold style. If you go to the next screen, if someone were interested in kind of changing that label to maybe default without bold, or if they needed to customize it in some other way, they can actually just get right at those type styles from this menu. Now, in practice, when we distribute the system and people are going to be using a text input, we actually restrict some of the overrides. So the systems team makes a huge use of overrides, but we actually only allow, by default, we only allow our designers to customize the things that they could actually easily customize in code. If they need to change a type style or whatever, that would actually be a customization of our code component. And so we don't allow it to happen in our default symbols. If they need to do that, they'll have to break the symbol. And that is a signal to them that they are actually kind of going off recipe.
And is there any, we're going to touch on governance in a little bit, but I'm curious because a lot of people I work with, design teams, they're like, how do we get people to not detach from symbol?
Mm-hmm.
Curious about that.
Yeah, I think, for me, the answer there is to make a system that has the flexibility built in, and that not just has the flexibility built in, but also that actually covers as many use cases as possible. And that's why for me, that's why building a design system and building, a UI actually takes a bit longer than like maybe your typical product development cycle, because when you're designing a system for as many products as Zendesk Garden supports, right? Zendesk has 8 products that we support through Garden. We have to be very diligent in making sure that our audit is complete, that we're talking with all of the right people, and covering as many of our bases as possible. So it is that combined flexibility, but also completeness. And look, a design system I don't think is ever meant to build 100% of the user interface. There's always going to be places where the system doesn't make sense to apply. And that's a real balancing act. It requires a lot of restraint, because a systems designer wants the system to work for everything, and it's just, you have to be realistic about it.
Yeah, so the system has to be somewhat flexible.
Yeah.
Let's jump into, did you want to say anything more about these input screens before we jump into the governance stuff?
I think the one last thing to say here is that we really like to make things as easy as possible for our designers. So we don't have, and you can see from this screen, we don't have a single, input symbol to rule them all. You could easily create just one button symbol and just have everybody mess with overrides to get the thing that they need. But in the end, that's not easy for designers to remember. And it's not like a great user experience as a designer to have to do that every time you place a button. And so the design systems team actually does the work of saying, like, okay, like, what are the most common variations that we need to support here, and actually build symbols for each of those things. And we name them in such a way, we use Sketchrunner to help our designers have kind of a faster workflow. So if you name things in a predictable way, people can just kind of type in and say, like, text input, and they'll get what they need, or they can do text input success and they'll get what they need.
Yeah, I love that. I'm a big fan of Sketchrunner, sorry. So you guys check out that plugin. It's kind of like Alfred or Spotlight for Sketch. Let's jump into the unit tests, because I think that this is some really interesting stuff that your team is doing that not a lot of design system teams are doing yet, but I think that I'm really excited about this. So talk to me about what unit tests are for a design system.
Yeah, so we borrowed this from the developer world, but basically a unit test is something that you run automatically every time you make any changes to your code. It kind of validates against some, whatever it is that you want to test for, right? And so for the design system, we're kind of borrowing this terminology, but you can see in this screenshot that the file contains every single symbol in our sketch library, and we place it into a different file so that we can verify as we're working, is the naming correct? Is the resizing correct? Have I completed all of the variations that I need to complete based on what I'm seeing from the other symbols in the family that I'm working on? Does the new smart layout feature work as expected? That sort of thing. And it helps us catch a lot of those like little tiny like bugs or things that, it's really easy to miss. Oh, I resized it really big and it's fine. I forgot to resize it super small. And now I'm going to have to, if I don't catch it now and I need to go back and fix it, I'll have to go through a branching and approvals process. So being able to kind of catch these things in flight with the unit test is the best way for us to kind of ensure that we are delivering on our quality promise right away.
Cool. And so the dev or the designer, the systems designer is working alongside in the unit test the whole time?
Yeah, so generally speaking, once a symbol takes on enough of a life to reasonably be placed in here, they start to kind of build out the file, and as they are going through that kind of final round of QA, making sure that all of the override capabilities that we want are in place, but the ones that we don't want don't appear.
Yeah.
And all of that. Yep.
So cool. This is really awesome. All right. I want to talk about governance a little bit. Oops, let me get my Zoom proper. So this is when Allison and I were preparing for this webinar, we were really we talked a lot about like, how do you know when, like, where do the requests come from? How do you know if the design system is going to build it? Who works on it? So I'd love to hear, how your design system, how Garden and Zendesk manage that governance.
Yeah, absolutely. So, we on the Garden team have a really kind of special and unique working relationship with the rest of the company because we're supporting all of the different products. We have relationships across our entire global product development organization. And so we hear about requests in a kind of variety of different ways, sometimes through design critiques, sometimes through Slack. We have a number of Slack channels where developers and designers can ask us questions and then kind of surface needs. And then we also have, you can see there, the Garden Syncs, and these are regular meetings that the Garden team holds with the design and engineering teams in every office. So we have, I think, 8 in international product development offices all around the world. And so we meet with them on a regular basis, and that's how we can kind of learn about the things that we need to build. So, once a designer or an engineer surfaces a need, we go ahead and start to assess the effort and priority of that potential, new thing. We use t-shirt sizing, so small, medium, and large, and you can kind of see, right, like a small is hey, something's not working the way that I expected it to. Is it correct? Or maybe there's an accessibility bug we need to look at. Also things like new icons. Medium tends to be, this pattern works for me most of the way, but I need it to hit a specific use case, and I need to have that looked at especially. And then large tends to be a net new component, something that we don't have at all in the garden ecosystem yet. There are a number of ways that contributions can kind of happen from our larger product design organization. When something's small, a product designer tends to be able to just take it on. And in those cases, we just ask that they open up a branch in our abstract project and kind of follow the like clarity procedures that we have in place. You know, tell us what this is, tell us why it's needed, show us an example of product, that sort of thing. And then for the larger projects, the medium or large, depending on how complicated the new thing is, either the product designer can take the lead on it and they can get kind of almost like consulting support from a garden designer as they take it through that process. Or if it's really complicated and you know, kind of needs an extremely thorough design process, we'll resource a garden designer to it, and they will work in partnership with the person who requested it to make sure that it's hitting the use cases as specified.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah.
And they can work in Garden Contrib, that project, and they can work on a new component if they want, and then be able to move that over.
Exactly. Yeah, and then we have, you know, as you see down at the bottom, the actual review and deployment. These things are kind of all happening, honestly, like in a very fluid way. Auditing does tend to happen at the beginning, but it's kind of a continual process of showing the work to the rest of the organization and asking them, you know, does this fit into any of your flows that you need? And then of course, you know, validation and testing all happens more towards the end, but it's best to do that in a continual way because you don't want to design something and have, you know, this beautiful thing and then realize you can't get it through the door.
And on your design system team, is it all designers? Do you have a dev team that's a separate design system dev team? Are you all one team?
Yeah, so we are all, we're all one team, although, you know, kind of like organizationally, the designers report through design and the engineers report through engineering. But, you know, back in the old world where you could be in an office, we all sat together and there really was no delineation between, you know, oh, it's dev or oh, that's design. I think Zendesk has been really strategic in their investment in the design systems team, making sure that we have both design and engineering represented at all times, I think has helped the design system grow organically and also kind of best poised to help the rest of the organization as they start their adoption.
Cool. All right, I'm going to jump into Q&A. We have 9 minutes left for Q&A. Sorry we went over a little bit, but I thought the governance piece was really important. We have 74 questions. I just want everyone to know we're not going to get to all those questions, but we are going to post this and answer as many questions there. If we don't get to your question, hopefully we'll get to it there. So I'm just going to go through the list. How do you track activities related to your design system? Are you guys using a ticketing system, combo with abstract?
Yeah, so we base all of our project work in Jira. We have a product manager who helps us, you know, prioritize and make sure that we're aligning the work that we're doing with the rest of the organizational priorities. She's awesome. Cool. But yeah, the rest of the engineering organization is on Jira, and so are we.
Um, okay, next question, and this is like a hot topic around design systems. What metrics, do you have any way of measuring so that you understand your work is being used, it's effective?
Yeah. I can't go into a ton of details on this one, but metrics are something that we care about. We have mechanisms in place in our code components to understand when and how they're being used. We keep an eye on it, but their design systems, I think, are notoriously difficult to track on in terms of usage because a product is huge, and you know, in our design system, we only create React components right now, so we can only track the areas of the product that are in React. So it's a little bit of a challenge, but it is something that we care about, and it's something that we're always looking to improve as well.
Cool. What about accessibility? Do you have an accessibility person or team that sits on your team, or do they kind of come in as a consultant?
Yeah, so I kind of represent the design expertise on accessibility for the team. We've got a number of folks who are kind of training themselves up and really digging into learning about it as well. I think, you know, accessibility is an area that Zendesk is really focused on improving right now, and so we have a number of ways that we're going about that.
Cool, right on. While I was at Target, I learned a ton about accessibility because we had a massive team there, and I had never been lucky enough to work with a team, and so that was a really great experience. And yeah, okay. What do you use to publish your design system, and how do you push it out to the devs? Do you use like a website, a React-based website?
Yeah, so garden.zendesk.com is where we kind of publish all of our engineering, actually all of our documentation. We are open source, so anybody who wants to kind of contribute or forecast can do that on GitHub. But in terms of how a developer actually gets their stuff into their code base, all of our open source repos are up on NPM. And that's really the primary method for deployment.
Oh, I thought I could jump in here and maybe show some things. All right, let's jump to another question. What are some challenges you're facing at Zendesk around design systems?
I don't know that we have anything that's particularly like really unique in terms of design system challenges. I think that you know, the scale of our system and the scale of the products that we support certainly do present an interesting challenge for us. As I mentioned, we have a large number of products, and so building something that is agnostic, so such that every product could use it, but still useful to all of those products is always a challenge. But again, that's why that thoroughness is required. Yeah.
Are you guys using the same code-based components for all of those 8 projects? Or do they have like different look and feels, but they're like foundationally the same?
So there's only a universal visual appearance, which I think is probably a lucky thing for us. But we do support the customization of things through our theming. So if they need to make a change, they can. You know, I think you know, design systems challenges are always interesting on engineering because products come into being at different points in time, and so, you know, are the frameworks the same? Is the, you know, development language the same? Are there bundle size requirements? If this is going to be something that a customer puts on their page, they need to have something very small. Does Garden fit into that equation? These are all things that are challenges, and that are things that we do have to think about.
Cool, that's interesting. All right, another question. How do you deal with one-off solutions? or designs? Do you have a rule in place for when an element in the UI becomes a pattern or a component in your design system?
Yeah, so generally speaking, we won't bring anything into the garden design system unless it can be immediately useful in at least 2 of Zendesk's products. We tend to not want to bog down our system with things that may only work for one of the products, because again, we're building this as a universal kind of starting point for everybody else.
That makes sense. Yeah, I like that. Like at least 2, and then we start to build it. Let's pick out another question. How do you onboard new designers to the Zendesk design team? Do they go through a special training for the design system to learn that language?
Yeah, so the garden syncs that we talked about earlier are a really important learning mechanism for our team to get that introduction that they need and to be able to start to have that personal relationship with the team so that they feel comfortable asking questions. We give everybody, anybody who starts on the design team gets an onboarding buddy. Those folks are all really familiar with Zendesk and with Garden. And so there's a lot of kind of person-to-person learning, but we also have like a 101 presentation that we give every couple of months as well.
Right on. We'll take one last question from Jim Wilson. They say, hello from sunny Amsterdam. How do you communicate to your stakeholders and the rest of the business about changes or updates to the system?
Yeah, this is definitely an area for us that's evolving. I think Zendesk's product development org has grown significantly in the last few years, and so the communication challenges have changed over time. But the Garden website obviously has all of the new work that comes out. The Garden syncs that we talked about earlier, where the designers learn about things that are happening. We broadcast our kind of change log and new releases in our Slack channels. And we, again, back in the old world, we used to travel to all of the different international offices once a year to spend time with the product development teams, essentially doing, user research for ourselves around what problems are they having, what are the things they want the most help with, how can Garden provide value to them in ways that we aren't presently doing. And we're always kind of, especially now, looking for ways to tighten those feedback loops.
Cool. Yeah. Our next webinar should be like how to do all of that stuff in this new world and reality we find ourselves in. But
totally.
Well, thank you so much, Allison, for joining us. This was really great to be able to talk to you and dig in. So thank you so much for sharing and spending time with us today. Absolutely. So we really appreciate it. Yeah.
Yeah, my pleasure. It's great being here.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you everyone for being here as well. We'll get to your questions and we'll post that and we'll have the link to this video in 72 hours. So have a good day, everyone. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.